The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar, zero patience for slow walkers, those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night, have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show. And with me right now, I've got a very special guest. He has worked for numerous promotions across the country, and he's got an inspiring story to tell us here on the show. Pleased to welcome Mike Kinney, a.k.a. Cowboy Gator McGraw. Welcome, Mike, to Wrestling with Heart.
Thanks, Sam. I appreciate the opportunity to come and sit with you today.
Yes, it's my pleasure. So, tell me about your childhood. Where are you from?
I was born in Iowa, and my parents ended up moving to Minnesota when I was about 5 years old for a job. And I, from K through 12, that's where I attended school. So I grew up really on a farm in rural southern Minnesota. And that's pretty much the highlight of it, man. It was, I had one sibling. She's 5 years younger than me. So I was a big brother, and I always loved pro wrestling, and I didn't really do any athletic sports other than football. I played football from the time I was in 5th grade all the way through varsity in my senior year. So collegiate wrestling was never something I really got into, but football was kind of my jam. But that's that's where I grew up, Austin, Minnesota.
Well, I'm sure that all that training in football helped prepare you for the world of wrestling, because it's physicality and there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, you really think about that, because if anybody that's played football up there, like the worst part of football, in my opinion, is always practice. And so if you could make it through those really hot practices in the summertime, kind of leading up to those games, that's the drive that begins to build in you to be able to continue on, because obviously these kids love playing football, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. And there's a lot of similarities between that and pro wrestling or any other thing that anybody wants to achieve in their lives.
Yeah. And so Minnesota was such a hotbed for professional wrestling. Talk about the AWA and Vern Gagne and such an incredible territory. Was wrestling always something you enjoyed growing up?
So the funny thing about the AWA is that my first introduction into professional wrestling was the NWA. So having been living in Iowa, we didn't get AWA Syndicate TV down there, but we did get TBS. So my first actual memory of pro wrestling was when Dusty Rhodes got attacked by the Four Horsemen at a gas station. That I remember that so vividly. But yeah, then transitioning it when we after we had moved, there were it's kind of interesting because I would say you could throw a rock anywhere in Minnesota and hit somebody that knows someone that was involved in the AWA or watched the AWA, or it really was a huge thing for Minnesota as a whole. And I feel fortunate enough because like I got broken into the business by a bunch of a bunch of AWA guys in one way or another. They all had some connection to the AWA, whether they were students of an NWA or an AWA wrestler, or they were um, directly involved with the AWA themselves. It's really hard to come up on the pro wrestling scene in Minnesota and not have some kind of lineage attached to you in some way.
Who were some of
Who
your
were
favorite
some of your
wrestlers
favorite
growing
wrestlers
up?
growing up?
Well, first and foremost, I was a Hulk Hogan guy. So despite contrary belief, I was a Hulkster through and through. WrestleMania 6, I had my best friend at the time loved the Ultimate Warrior. So that's a feud that he and I don't know if we ever got over, but Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior, they were always a lot of fun to watch. But I was a Hulkster through and through. The funny thing about it is that I stayed really true to that WWF style until I started to get into my teenage years, and I started to grab some wrestling magazines, and I started to tape trading was becoming a really big thing back then. And the very first tape that I'd ever seen beyond any WWF stuff was the 1995 Kawasaki Dream Deathmatch tournament that that Mick Foley's famous for wrestling Terry Funk in the finals of that. So that was, believe it or not, my first exposure to anything international. And then I caught on to ECW. And we had a satellite dish. We had just gotten a satellite dish, and I remember I had seen the advertisements for the ECW shows in the wrestling magazines. And so I had set my VCR to record some ECW stuff because it was on like 2:00 in the morning on like a weekday, and so, but I really wanted to see it. I had no idea who these guys were, and I knew Terry Funk was involved somehow. And again, I'd just seen him on this tape and knew Terry Funk from the NWA. So I was once I saw ECW, it changed everything for me. I knew as a kid I wanted to be a wrestler. That's all I ever wanted to do. But the minute I saw ECW, I knew what kind of wrestler I wanted to be.
It was a huge alternative at the time because not a lot of promotions were really doing that kind of unique style that ECW was doing.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't just blood and guts either. There was a lot of international exposure to guys in Japan and Mexico. I mean, all over the place, and you got to see the Eddie Guerreros and the Dean Malenkos of the world before WCW, and they were doing all this incredibly technically sound stuff that you'd really only seen out of guys like Bret Hart, but Bret wasn't even doing the stuff those guys were doing. So it was such a new thing, and it just caught on right at the right time. The music that they used for everything really helped it. The Philadelphia crowd, oh my gosh, I don't know that they could have gotten that product over anywhere other than Philadelphia, but yeah, it's what an amazing ride they had.
So ECW, I guess it's fair to say, watching the product at that time was when you had to get into the business.
Yeah, I knew that because, watching WWF or WCW at the time, it was really all these guys that were just monsters. And, either they were really tall, they were really muscular, or both. And I just kept thinking wow, ECW has just a bunch of guys who might look like someone you might run into at the grocery store, but they can go. And it gave me a bit more hope that I could be a professional wrestler after all. So it really changed my outlook on how I was going to pursue the wrestling business, because the internet was in its infancy at that time. And I remember I didn't even have the internet. I had a friend that did, and it was dial up. And we were probably in 8th or 9th grade, and we were in his basement. He was the only person I knew that had the internet, and we were looking up wrestling schools online because we were trying to just do as much research as we could. And pulling up the first, I remember it was the, oh my gosh, they were featured on the Beyond the Mat documentary out of California. And
All Pro Wrestling.
There you go, that's the one. So that school was the only one that we could find. And I remember their homepage probably took 15 minutes to load, and we just sat there just on the edge of our seats, waiting for this page to completely download so we can find out how to be wrestlers. And but that's how it all started, man.
Yeah, and I think it's an amazing documentary. They talk about how wrestlers go through so much to finally get noticed. And you had two guys that went on to have a tryout for WWE. You know?
And beyond that, I mean, like you look at Mike Modest was one of those guys, and Mike ended up having a great career in Japan with Noah. He got a lot of looks by the WWE. He did some Ring of Honor, so he really had a heck of a run.
Most definitely. And I think that documentary also shows the hardships of being a pro wrestler. It's not all glitz and glamour. It's a hard business.
Yeah, that documentary itself really exposed that in a very positive way, and it exposed it on both ends. It exposed it on the beginning of a wrestler's career, and it exposed it on the other side. It was following guys like Dennis Stamp and Jake the Snake, who were at the twilight of their careers, still trying to make a little money or waiting for a booking or whatever it was, and showing how, like, you were seeing both extremes, not to use that word out of context here, but seeing both extremes, the guys breaking in that are hungry and the guys at the end of it that are still trying to hang on. And you're just kind of sitting there in this like euphoric state watching this going, is this really what I want to get myself into, right? But I'm sure you've heard wrestlers talk about it before. It's like once you're bitten by that pro wrestling bug, it's really, really hard to find balance after that and to not want to do it.
Exactly. It's all about go, and you have to commit to it 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
Now talk about your training. I'm sure you had to run through a lot of drills and exercises. It's intense. You get workouts. What was your training experience like?
My training experience is very unconventional, and I don't know if I've ever talked about it publicly before, but you might be one of the first ones. What initially happened is there was an independent show that was run by some students of some AWA guys that had come to my little armory in Austin, Minnesota, and I think I was 15, and this same buddy of mine that had the internet that I was telling you about, we knew they were coming, and we showed up to the venue incredibly early because we wanted to just like see these guys. Now is our chance to be able to see wrestlers before they're in the building. And I know it does sound creepy, like we're stalking these guys, like hanging out outside of an armory, but we watched them walk in and everything. And then we walked into the building, and they knew we were kids, and they were, we had asked them if they'd kind of bump us around a little bit or show us some wrestling moves. And they did. And what ended up happening, I mean, they pounded on us pretty good, and I think that they were trying to get us to not come back, and then of course they came back like 6 or so months later. We went back again, same result, except this time they told us about one of the guys had a camp that he was running just over the border into Iowa, and so me and a couple other friends decided we were going to go check it out. So it was like me and 4 or 5 other guys that were local, just friends of mine, and keep in mind we're 16, okay. We go to his camp that was set up in in like a storage shed in this little town in Iowa, and there was another indie worker that was with him at the time, and we like did a full camp that day. He showed us how to run the ropes. He showed us like the fundamentals of how to like move around in the ring without killing yourself, and then after that, these other guys and I decided that we were going to start running some of our own shows and helping like train other guys and show them what we've learned. And we became students of pro wrestling. We would go to as many shows as we could and try to learn from as many of the workers as we could without going to a formal school. But that only was able to last us for so long. And finally we had to break down and go, okay, now we need to go to a school. And so it ended up being almost the same core of guys that I was just talking about. We would travel 3 days a week, 2 hours each way during the week, to a camp that was in Minneapolis. And it was run by 2 of Ken Patera's students. And we were doing everything from every drill that you could imagine is where we were learning how to bump, we were learning how to feed, run the ropes, we were learning the psychology of it. We learned a lot in a very short amount of time. And that core group of guys and I, we all lived together. So it was almost like a pro wrestling fraternity. I mean, all we did was eat, sleep, and breathe pro wrestling. We studied tapes together. Everything was
camaraderie.
Yeah, for sure. And we knew that like if we stuck with it, eventually we'd be traveling together to shows and all that. And that did end up happening. And then over time, what happened was we all kind of went our separate ways because we had our own kind of like styles and had our own kind of niche within the Minnesota world. And each one of us kind of started doing our own camps and stuff. I ended up going to the way I explain it to people who don't really understand pro wrestling is it's almost like a finishing school, but it was like a week-long training camp with Harley Race, Les Thatcher, and Ricky Steamboat in Missouri, which was an amazing experience to be able to work with those guys for that week and just kind of polish us up a little bit. But that's really how I got in, and I stayed in for about 10 years.
Do you remember any pieces of advice that you got from them that you still apply to today?
Yeah, for sure. I talk about a little bit of it in my TED Talk. My dad had passed away right after I broke into the business, and my dad was a huge wrestling fan, and so he'd always had this. My dad always had this comment about how like I was going to be his retirement fund. He was so proud that I was wrestling. He never missed a show. But it wasn't long after I broke in. I was only in the business a year or two at that point, and so I didn't know if I wanted to keep doing it. And he'd only passed away a couple of days before the advice I'm going to tell you about here in a second. And we hadn't even had the funeral yet, so it was just kind of like this weird time where I was just like, I think I need to go to the show just to get out of the house. And I was sitting in the locker room, and everybody kind of knew what had happened with my dad. And one of the guys had come over to me. And I told him that I just basically didn't know I wanted to do this anymore. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And his advice to me was to take a look at what I'm really good at and use that to catapult me to the next level and to turn, he used the term turn it up. And my TED Talk is all based around this whole theme of turning it up. But that changed my momentum from there. And I think that had that not happened, my wrestling career would have either ended very abruptly or it would have taken a strange turn somehow. And I'm not quite sure how, but I know that moment had changed my life. You kind of look back on your life and these moments that you see as like bullet points. That's certainly one of them. So turning up the bigger parts of yourself to make them who you are in the ring is so incredibly true. And that was the really big first piece of advice that I've gotten. Harley Race is his advice. Harley had two pieces of advice. The first one I realize now was a bit tongue-in-cheek. Harley told us that he would drink a case of beer every night to keep his water weight up. So as a young 20-something-year-old, where I'm thinking, well, if Harley can drink a case of beer every night to keep his water weight up, why can't I do that? But in all seriousness, Harley's biggest piece of advice was don't try to be like everybody else and take as many bookings as you can. That's it. Because on the independent scene, especially during that time, there would be a lot of like, well, if you work for me, you can't work for that promoter. It's like, well, okay, I can go work somewhere else then. And so, but Harley was pretty adamant about that. You need to get as much ring time as you can, especially, in your younger years in the business, that you can figure it out, and nobody should be holding you back in that way.
No, I mean, you really want something, you go after it and try to get as many opportunities as you can.
Yeah, for sure.
That's how you get noticed.
Yep, you're right.
All right. So you're in the business now, have an incredible career, got to work with so many people. Who have been some of your favorite opponents that you got to wrestle against over the years?
Yeah, some of my favorite opponents have been some of my closest friends because you can get away with a lot with them, and especially if they're good workers. I usually worked as a heel, as a babyface. So the guys that I worked really well with were really close to me and were great heels. So I'm going to give them shout outs. And if you don't know these guys, that's okay. You missed out on some really great wrestlers. But there's one named Shimdog. There was one named Casanova. We all really worked on the independent scene very, very closely. So having matches with those guys was almost like a night off. But then there were other guys that, you wrestled throughout the country that were amazing to work with. I got to work with Human Tornado a couple of times, and people know him from PWG. He was fantastic. I got to work with Chad Collier, who was in the early days of Ring of Honor. And I remember talking to him in the locker room and telling him I'm not very good at the technical wrestling stuff. And if you don't know Chad Collier, he was He was as close to Dean Malenko as you were going to get. He was one of Dean's students. He had an amateur background. He was incredible, but he was on those first, 2-3 years of Ring of Honor shows. And his forte was mat wrestling and the technical side of it, and mine was not. I was more of a Stan Hansen type brawler guy. And I remember talking to him and saying, "Hey, I'm not good at this stuff, but can you just like walk me through it in the ring? Like, I want to learn it. I want to learn from someone like you." And so he was so gracious about it and did. And we would be, if I couldn't figure out how to get out of a move, he would just kind of like sprinkle a little pixie dust in my ear and let me know how to do it. And it was very, very cool. And then being on shows with legends too, like Hacksaw Jim Duggan, like guys like that, Rikishi. It's always humbling to be able to be, even if you're not in the ring with them, just kind of in their presence in the locker room to really learn from them. It's a very big deal. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Matt Seidel, I got to work with him. Larry Sweeney, I don't know if you know Larry Sweeney. He was one of the Chikara students. Unfortunately, passed away several years ago, but he was incredible to work with. He and I meshed really, really well. But I was very fortunate. I was at one point, and I worked for about 10 years. And at one point, I was probably like one of only 2 or 3 wrestlers out of Minnesota that were getting flown across the country to wrestle. And that was a pretty big deal because, there were a lot of guys that were much better at the wrestling side of it than I was, but I just happened to be really, really good at the marketing side. So I was able to get out there a little bit more than they did.
What made you decide to transition from being a competitor to working a different capacity?
For me, it was like, I thought that the stars were kind of aligning for me to leave. My wife was pregnant. I had blown my shoulder out really bad, and I'd had a surgery. I had come back from a surgery and continued to wrestle. And then I hurt my shoulder again, and I knew that based on what the doctor had told me that I was never going to be able to wrestle again. So, when like you're in, in our society, it's if something's bad for you, you have to quit it. If you smoke, you should quit smoking or whatever, right? Like all those things. So in my mind, wrestling was bad for me at that point. So I had to like quit wrestling cold turkey. And so I was very fortunate enough to be able to be in a position where I could wrestle one of my very close friends in my final match and walk away. But then I cut off the entire wrestling world after that. I distanced myself from the business and the people that I knew in it. I didn't watch it anymore. I mean, I completely walked away from it. And what ended up happening because of it is that I slipped into a depression, and I started, it's kind of interesting now because I look back on some of the photos, like the last 3 years of wrestling, you can really see. So like 2 years before I got out, the photos that were taken of me, they're very bright, and you can just see it on my face. I'm like so excited to be there. The next year I had gotten hurt, and some of that shine had worn off a little bit. But that last year that I knew I was going to be done, you can see like on my face in the ring, you can see plain as day I didn't want to even be there. And so it's just this. I was already kind of trending in that direction, and I was subsidizing my pain with alcohol, and it was a very slippery slope for me. And I slipped into alcoholism. I slipped into a depression, and all the while I felt horrible because here I am, a new father, and that should be a very exciting thing, and it should be a very positive thing, and it was. But I didn't realize how badly I was hurting myself because I just took wrestling completely away, and I was hurting other people around me because of it, and I didn't know, So that slippery slope continued to happen for about 8 years, until one day, we all kind of hit rock bottom at the same time. Mine was, I didn't end up. Luckily, I didn't end up hurting myself or anybody else, or end up, in any kind of legal problems whatsoever. But I was gonna, and it was just a matter of time. And I think that I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones who was able to get ahead of it and stop it from getting worse.
What was the one thing that motivated you to start getting better?
My family. When I realized I'd put them in danger, not just once, multiple times, and it came time to figure out, do I want my family or do I want to continue down the path that I'm on? I chose them, and I never really looked back. I think that that helped me in a lot of ways prioritize my life. And I really hadn't had to make that decision before. And I knew that it was hurting people around me, but I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. And I know that sounds odd to say, but anybody who's ever struggled with any kind of dependency like that knows that you don't set out to hurt other people. Like that's not what's happening. It's you're trying to like dull a pain that you don't even know you have, you know. And that's the world I was living in.
Change
Change
always starts with the
individual.
individual. Starts with you. And then from there, it's a process. So you have to be able to work on yourself, get yourself in the right frame of mind, so that you can prevent future incidents from happening.
Yeah, you know, I think one of the things that really helped me, especially that first year, was I attended a lot of AA meetings. And what was great about that I mean, you get to hear other people's stories and you start to realize that you're not alone. But really, the main thing that I picked up from all of those meetings was that nobody ever quits doing something that's harmful to themselves unless they want to. You can send somebody to rehab, you can do all these things legally to people, but unless they really truly want to make a change, that change is never going to come. And so that's where I was at. I was like, I want to change so I don't end up in a much worse situation, you know. So yeah, that's the biggest part that I learned out of all that.
Now today, you know, you're paying it forward. You're doing these TED Talks, and you're looking at making a comeback.
Yeah, you know, so I got sober in 2015, and in 2017, I was lucky enough to be able to tell part of my story in a TED Talk that amazingly went viral, and I'm so grateful for that to have happened, because that was another one of those points in my life that changed everything for me. And I wasn't ready at that time to tell the rest of my story. I really, you know, my alcoholism, I kept secret. I kind of suffered in silence. I didn't talk about it to many people. The people that were close to me and around me knew what was going on, and some had distanced themselves from me because they thought that I would maybe go back to my old ways. I think now they realize, I mean, it's been a decade, so we're in a different time in our lives, all of us anyway, but everyone was still very weary of it, and which I understand, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. As time went on, you know, COVID came, and during COVID, I'd worked for the same company for 14 years. So I left wrestling, and then I was with one organization for 14 years. I got laid off during COVID. I found another company to work for, and 11 months later, I got laid off from them. So I got laid off twice in 12 months. And I was initially, after the TED stuff happened, my plan was to go out and be a, I guess, motivational speaker. I hate that term because it sounds so phony, but I wanted to be able to go out and speak to people about what my journey looked like, to see how many people I could help. And then COVID happened. That kind of shut all that stuff down. And then I ended up getting laid off a couple of times, and I'm like looking for jobs. So I had to put all of that kind of on the back burner. And now I'm in a position in my life where this year will be 10 years that I've been sober. I'm very secure in where I'm at in my professional life, I think. And I'm ready to tell the rest of that story. And so I had this idea last fall to maybe use my return to the pro wrestling business as the vessel to tell the rest of the story. And I had worked with a local promoter whom I'd worked with when I was wrestling back in the day, and pitched the idea to him. He loved it, fully on board for it. And one of the guy that I'm actually in the angle with right now on my way back to the ring is one of those guys I told you about that was in our little in our wrestling fraternity back in the day. We broke in the wrestling business together. We lived together, right? So for me, it's like a full circle thing. You know, I get to work with him again, and so we're able to do some things that typically you wouldn't be able to do with other wrestlers in that way. But yeah, so then it started out like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to really stretch this whole thing out. We're going to tell a really like a year-long story. You don't see that very often, especially on the independent scene. And we're just going to really get some mileage out of it. Well, along the way, I'd met some people that are in the filmmaking business, and I decided, well, I'm going to pitch them this idea, right? And maybe they can just kind of film the return, and I can use it for some of my public speaking engagements after the wrestling stuff is done here this year. And it's morphed into this whole other thing about now how we're filming my story, but we're filming some other independent wrestler stories as well. And there's some other people that we're speaking with that were in the WWE that aren't there anymore, and we're trying to see if they want to be a part of it. And really, it's about so many things, but its core value is really mental health. You know, you look at what happened to me when I left wrestling, and you can compare it to any other athlete that leaves whatever field it is that they've chosen. Let's talk about football for a second. We talked about that a minute ago. You look at an NFL football player and how fortunate they are to get there, and how the odds are always stacked against them to be able to get to that point. They played football as a kid. Maybe they won the state championship in high school. They go to college and they have a scholarship, and they're the top guy there. They get drafted, and then maybe they get hurt their second year in the NFL, and they're only 23, 24 years old. Well, you have an entire lifetime ahead of you, and up to this point, they're only Stanley the football guy, right? That's all they know. That's all they've ever been. And then what? And because we're always taught you can be whatever you want to be, but at some point, it stops. And nobody ever teaches you what the next thing is or how to be prepared for it. And that is what this documentary is all about. It's the what next thing.
I think that's pretty cool because you don't really think about what does come next. Life after wrestling is just as important as life in wrestling. And I think that it's amazing to have such a documentary done on this concept.
Yeah. It's never been done before. Certainly never been done with professional wrestling. And I think that interviewing guys other than me, again, my story is the vessel to carry the entire story along. But to hear it from other people that have experienced it is going to be incredibly emotional. I mean, there's no support for people who leave their chosen profession. And it doesn't just have to be athletic. I just told you that I was with the same company for 14 years. I thought I was going to be there for 40, and I got laid off, and I'm like, well, I don't know what's next. I don't know what to do. I'm not prepared to interview anywhere. I'm not prepared to put my resume out. I'm not prepared at all. So this is a theme of mine I've found in my life, and that you just have to continuously overcome, and it's grit and it's grind and it's all these things. And I want to be able to give those tools to people because they're real and they've never been given out in a support function before. And I want to be that person.
Yeah. Definitely an inspiring story. And judging by our conversation, I fully believe that your story can help pay it forward to other people that are going through a similar situation.
I hope so. I really truly do.
Yeah. Well, this has been wonderful, Mike, to talk with you. And I want to say thank you for coming on to Wrestling with Heart. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube. Where can people find more about you and what you're doing and all the fun stuff coming up?
Yeah, there's plenty of opportunity for people to get involved with the film itself. There's a Kickstarter coming out very soon, June 22nd, 2025. A Kickstarter will launch where you can get an opportunity to be a part of the film, to be in the film. The money is being raised to really lift up the filming side of it. The film industry is very, very expensive, and to be able to do this story the right way, we do need some help. There's also an opportunity that we have. We are involved with a nonprofit organization based out of the Twin Cities here in Minnesota called Film North. They have fiscally sponsored us, which means that you can give tax-deductible donations to the film. And all of it goes to helping either pre or post-production, long-term. If you're looking to follow me just along on the journey, there's a couple of places you can do it. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me there, Gator McGraw. You can go to my website, kinneyconfidence.com, and sign up for our email list there. And that'll give, we're trying to keep everybody updated along the way and let them know what the next steps are for the Kickstarter and the film and just all of those wonderful things you'll find right there at kinneyconfidence.com.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks again. And you're more than welcome to come back. We'll do a part two as it gets closer to the film's release.
Oh, I would love that. I would love that.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.